Thank you, Ayo, and thank you, Minister Ince. And for those who don't know, I don't know if Ayo shared that he's with Drummers from Home, and I guess Minister Ince is now part of that group, so thank you, Minister Ince. So, Minister Ince, Christine Hansen, distinguished panel members that are scattered around the room, ladies and gentlemen, good evening. Thank you for joining us this evening for the International Day for the Elimination of Racial Discrimination, and for attending this lecture, Becoming an Effective Ally, Understanding Systemic Racism. I'd like to begin by acknowledging that we are on the traditional Mi'kmaq lands of the Mi'kmaq, the ancestral territory of the Mi'kmaq people. My name is Tracy Thomas, and I'm the Senior Policy Analyst with African Nova Scotian Affairs. And together with the Human Rights Commission, we've partnered to host this event for you this evening. And really wanting to recognize the importance of this day of remembrance. So thank you all for attending. So at this time, I'd like to call on the CEO of the Human Rights Commission, Christine Hansen, the Director and CEO of the Human Rights Commission, to officially welcome everybody here today. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Tracy, and good evening, and thank you for joining us this evening to commemorate the United Nations International Day to Eliminate Racial Discrimination. I would like to acknowledge Honourable Tony Ince, Minister of African Nova Scotian Affairs and Minister responsible for the Public Service Commission. Together with African Nova Scotian Affairs, the Human Rights Commission is very pleased to present this panel discussion entitled Becoming an Effective Ally, Understanding Systemic Racism. This is a very important issue for the Human Rights Commission, and I think it goes without saying that racism cannot be something that we attend to once a year. Certainly we attend to this pretty regularly at the Human Rights Commission, but it is important. Today, March 21st, it acts as a reminder for all of us that racism comes in many forms. It remains a problem, not only around the world, as we can see from the events of this week, but here in Nova Scotia and Halifax as well. When racist beliefs, biases, and hatred find their way into institutions and systems of government, education, and the justice system, it can harm and magnify the perception and representation of people of color, some very negative stereotypes, and we work very hard at the Commission to try to educate and counter those stereotypes. This representation and participation is very essential if we aim to bring true equity and diversity into our institutions and systems. It's not enough that we embrace concepts of equity and diversity. These values must inform how we act towards one another. And I hope that following tonight's discussion, we can all leave here with a commitment to act in ways that demonstrate our understanding of what it means to be an effective ally and to speak up when we see discrimination in action. I would like to thank all of those who have been involved with organizing today's event. I actually just came off of a plane from having been away with my kids for a bit, and so people have been working very hard at ANZA and at the Commission to pull two events together today. I'm so sorry to have missed the first event, which I hear was fantastic, but I think tonight's event is going to be wonderful as well. Thank you also to the Delmore Buddy Day Learning Institute. This is just a wonderful space. We've had a few events from the Commission here in this space. I love being here every time. It's just got a wonderful energy, and I really appreciate it. The selection of panelists promises to be a very thoughtful and lively discussion. And now I'd like to invite Minister Ince, who is going to say a few words before we get started with the panel. Thank you.
Good evening, everyone, and thank you, Christine. Ladies and gentlemen, I too would like to first of all acknowledge that we are in Mi'kmaq, the ancestral territory of the Mi'kmaq people. I'm pleased to join you as we come together to recognize the United Nations International Decade for the Elimination of Racial Discrimination. Today, we are joining people from around the world to take a stand against systemic racism, discrimination, prejudice, and related intolerances, which is still a reality in many parts of the world, as we've all, was mentioned and as we've seen in the news most recently. We must continue to address issues of race that exist in our society. We must be willing to have those difficult conversations. We must listen to each other and hear each other. And we must embody a willingness to change. Nova Scotians deserve to live in a place, in a province, where all individuals are treated with dignity, equity, and respect. Folks, the key thing for me as a member of the African Nova Scotian community is allyship. We need allies, not just during those difficult times. We need them 24/7, 7 days a week. We need you to dig deep down inside when there are those instances, those moments that cause others pain, cause them to be uncomfortable. If you were sitting there and deep in your head and in your mind, and we all know, and you're wrestling with an uncomfortable feeling that has happened around you, we need you to speak up as well. You have to help us eliminate all those negative stereotypes. We have to help eliminate and treat people equally, welcome people. I'm very optimistic. As the Minister of African Nova Scotian Affairs, I'm very optimistic because I truly see a change, a shift, and I see more people speaking up, stepping up to speak about any injustice, any intolerance, things that are not equitable. Ladies and gentlemen, you're going to hear a great panel this evening. For those of you who may not be aware of some of the ongoing systemic issues that many in my community has faced, not only in my community, LGBTQI, any Syrians, Muslims, we see it all happening. I beg you all to take a little something from this evening, and when you go out there, I ask you, please be a very good ally. Thank you, and have a good evening.
Thank you, Minister Ince. Thank you, Christine. So now it is my pleasure that we have a little bit of entertainment. So I want to introduce Shanice Skinner. Shanice is from New Glasgow and is a graduate of Wilfrid Laurier University, holding an honors Bachelor of Music with vocal performance. Shanice attended the Franco-American Vocal Academy in France, performing the role of Gustave in Offenbach's Pomme de Pie in 2017. She then performed the role of Zurlana in Mozart's Don Giovanni in Halifax Summer Opera Festival in 2018. Some of her awards include 2016-2018 Nova Scotia Talent Trust Scholarship recipient, 2016 Portia White Award of Exceptional Commitment and Potential in Voice, and last year she was awarded the Rose Bowl for Senior Voice at the Nova Scotia Music Festival. I know. And that's not all. This past August, Shanice was Nova Scotia's voice representative at the 2018 National Music Festival in New Brunswick. Currently, Shanice teaches voice and piano at Long and McQuaid in Dartmouth and is a section lead soloist at First Baptist Church in Halifax. I welcome Shanice to the stage. person from New Glasgow. Thank you. So that, Shanice, that was absolutely beautiful. I'm very, very proud. I've known Shanice all of her life. She's like a little niece for me. And so for those who want to know more about Shanice, she has a website, shaniceskinner.com. So if you want to book her for any events, I'm doing a little plug in there for you, sweetie. So there you go. Okay. So now, before I introduce the moderator of the panel, I'd like to share a little bit of background on the importance of this day. So on March 21st, in 1960, so that's 59 years ago, on this exact day, the Sharpeville massacre happened in South Africa. This is when police opened fire and killed 69 people at a peaceful protest, peaceful demonstration against apartheid, the pass laws in Sharpeville, South Africa. So what are the pass laws? The pass laws were an internal passport system designed to control the movement of black people. Pass laws required that black people had to carry identifying documents with them at all times. So similar to our passport when we travel, if you go into any other country, you need that passport stamped. That's the identification that they needed to have within their own town. And so these identifying documents had to contain stamps providing official proof that that person in question had the permission to be in the town at the time. So you can imagine this restrictive law was the dominant feature in South Africa's apartheid system, which ended until it ended in 1986. So today, March 21st, commemorates the lives that have been lost to the fight for democracy and human rights in South Africa during the apartheid regime. And by proclaiming that day in 1966, the United Nations, the General Assembly, called on the international community to increase its efforts to eliminate all forms of racial discrimination. So fast forward to today, in the year 2019, and we are in the 5th year of the UN's Decade for People of African Descent, a decade that recognizes that people of African descent represent a distinct group whose human rights must be promoted and protected. So it is with that as a little bit of a context and a backdrop that we move into the panel, Becoming an Effective Ally, Understanding Systemic Racism. So this session provides an opportunity for persons who are allies, like yourselves, so thank you for coming, and wish to be allies of racialized people to better understand the intricacies of systemic racism. And so let's continue this, let's start the conversation. So I'd like to introduce our moderator, Dr. Kaysa Monroe-Anderson, who will moderate the panel. So Dr. Monroe-Anderson is a zealous, community-oriented individual who practices an Afrocentric approach to leadership. Living out her philosophy that leadership and lifelong learning go hand in hand, Kaysa has attained a Bachelor's of Arts degree in English with honors and a Master's of Arts degree in English from Acadia University, as well as a Master's of Education in Lifelong Learning with a focus of Afrocentric leadership at Mount St. Vincent University, graduating in 2008, where she was a valedictorian that year. I know, yay. In May just last year, in 2018, Kaysa was the first person of African descent to graduate from the Inter-University Doctoral of Educational Studies program, with Mount St. Vincent University being her degree-granting institution. Her doctoral dissertation explored the role of spirituality as an anti-oppressive agent in the formal education of African Nova Scotian learners. Kaysa is currently employed as the Manager of Race Relations, Equity, and Inclusion with the Nova Scotia Human Rights Commission, and I welcome Kaysa.
Good evening, everyone. And welcome, and thank you very much for coming. It's beautiful to see this room packed to the point of overflow. I want to thank you again for coming, and thank you, Tracy, for your warm introduction, and also for the opportunity to work with you and the other folks at ANZA. Welcome, Minister Ince, and thank you for coming, and welcome back home, Christine. So we are here today because of the horrendous act on March 21st, 1960, when police opened fire and killed 69 African men, women, and children, injuring about 300 as they peacefully demonstrated against the apartheid pass laws in Sharpeville, South Africa, as Tracy mentioned earlier. We are here today because it has been 50 years since the United Nations International Convention on the Elimination of All Forms of Racial Discrimination, and it was about 50 years since that was enforced in 1969 in response to that racist act. But we are also here today because racism in its various forms, systemic, institutionalized, individual, cultural, still exist, not only in faraway places like South Africa, not only through the Trump factor infecting the United States of America and beyond throughout the world, but it has also, unfortunately, been commonplace right here in this country and closer still in our province of Nova Scotia. I hold the position of Race Relations, Equity and Inclusion Manager, and the Nova Scotia Human Rights Commission has such an office because of the Donald Marshall Jr. inquiry, which sought to correct traditions of systemic racism, which resulted in a Mi'kmaq man being wrongfully convicted in 1971 of killing an African Nova Scotian man and spending 11 years of his life imprisoned for a murder he did not commit. And we may say that Sharpsville and the Donald Marshall inquiry case and Viola Desmond's encounter happened a long time ago, but we would only need to open our social justice eyes to be aware that in 2019, there is still a need for all of us to join in, to fight for, to advocate for, and to take individual as well as collective action and responsibilities towards the elimination of racial discrimination in all forms. So we are not there yet, which is what brings us here today, or this evening. This evening, we specifically turn our focus towards systemic racism, the policies, processes, and practices which are entrenched into our established organizations, our institutions, within society, within the walls, within the very foundations of these institutions, and serve as barriers to African people, indigenous people, racialized immigrants, newcomers, and all racialized people. So we're here to talk about how the inner workings of systems discriminate against racialized people. We're also here to talk about how non-racialized people can serve as allies, how non-racialized people can use their influence, power, and privileges in the work towards eliminating these barriers. So what does it mean to be an ally? And further, what does it mean to be an effective ally? So we're here tonight to talk about becoming an effective ally, unpacking systemic racism. We invite you to feel comfortable with discomfort tonight. If you feel a little antsy in your seats, that's okay. You may be learning or hearing new information tonight, and that's fine. Usually when we're encountering a process where our beliefs and our value systems may be challenged, we go through that period of discomfort. And we invite you to sit in it, as we normally say, Mahogany and I in our training sessions, just sit in it and work through that in that space tonight with us. We invite you to do that. We also invite you in the spirit of reconciliation, as we acknowledge that we are on Mi'kmaq territory, to think about what are your responsibilities, what is your role as it entails eliminating racism. What can you do with the power that you have, with the privileges that you have, with the opportunities you have? We invite you to recognize that Nova Scotia is the birthplace of African presence in this country. And what does that mean as we reflect on the history of Nova Scotia and on the realities of today in Nova Scotia? Ubuntu, I am because you are. It's a South African philosophy that means that a person is only a person because of other people. So in this space, we're all connected here tonight. We're connected in this space of sharing and of learning. And I hope that you will join me in making this space as safe as possible. Without further ado, I'd like to welcome our panelists to the front. First of all, I will invite Sundy Miller to come forward. Sundy Miller completed her post-secondary education at Dalhousie University, where she obtained her first degree in developmental biology and then went on to obtain a master's in business administration. As well as working overseas, she has served as the executive director of a number of community organizations such as the Black Educators Association, ADSM, and the National Historic Site of Africville. At present, she is the academic chair for the School of Access at the Akerley campus of Nova Scotia Community College. Sundy prefers to work in collaboration with people and tries to treat everyone with respect, since she believes that we all have gifts which, when released, will create a stronger home, community, and organization. Let's welcome Sundy Miller. Secondly, you join me in welcoming Jericho Simons. Jericho Simons is currently employed full-time with the Halifax Regional Municipality as a program manager with the Youth Advocate Program and part-time with Mount St. Vincent University as Black Student Support Coordinator. He is co-founder of Future Roots Halifax, a social enterprise employing young people ages 13 through 17 in Halifax North End. Jericho has tirelessly advocated for communities across HRM on issues including, but not limited to, poverty, unemployment, affordable housing, marginalization, and community violence. Jericho Simons holds an undergraduate degree in Child and Youth Study, graduated in 2012. He's completed an MED in counseling through Acadia University in 2018 and is currently completing his Canadian Certified Counselor certification. Join me in welcoming again Jericho Simons. Shakira Weatherdon, we welcome you. Shakira Weatherdon is the CEO of Uruhu Professional Development and Consulting Services. Shakira is a respected trainer with nearly a decade of experience in sexualized violence, equity, and inclusion. She provides subject matter expertise and leads the implementation of equity-related programs and serves full-time at Nova Scotia Community College as the Equity and Inclusion Consultant. Supporting organizations and communities to create safer, more welcoming, and inclusive environments is Shakira's passion. She received her MA in Gender and Peace Building from the United Nations mandated University for Peace, and her honors Bachelor of Arts in Gender and Development Studies from the University of Toronto. Let's welcome again Shakira Weatherdon. And our last panelist is Donny Fairfax. Let's welcome him. Donny Fairfax has worked in employment services for more than 20 years for organizations such as the African Canadian Employment Clinic, Options Work Activity Program, and the YMCA Employment and Education Services. He has worked on special employment initiatives such as the Halifax Regional Police Science Project for African Nova Scotians and the HRM recruitment and training of Black firefighters. Donny has also served in an advisory capacity as chair of the Nova Scotia Community College African Nova Scotian Advisory Committee. Presently, Donny is the manager and employer engagement specialist with the YMCA Nova Scotia Works Employment Center on Main Street in Dartmouth. Welcome, Donny. So we had an earlier panel today on systemic racism, and we had a power panel. And I believe we have an equally powerful panel tonight, so it's my pleasure and my honor to have you join us tonight, panelists. What I will do is ask that we start from Sunday, and we'll work our way over. And you're provided 5 minutes, as you know, to provide your insight on the topic. After those minutes, and Tracy's going to help me to time keep so that we stay on point, and she'll give you a sign when you're coming towards the end of your 5 minutes. And at that time, I will offer some questions to you and then open the floor for more questions. So thank you very much, and we look forward to hearing from you.
The topic of my talk this evening is called Living in a Culture of Racism. And I want to state up front that I am speaking from my own personal observation and experience. And a racist culture is insidious. And it's a mindset of racism that is pervasive throughout the culture. The Canadian Oxford Dictionary defines racism as a belief in the superiority of a particular race, prejudice based upon this belief, antagonism towards other races, especially as a result of this prejudice, and lastly, the theory that human abilities, intelligence, etc., are determined by race. When we speak of systemic racism, I believe that we are saying that we have a culture of racism. A culture of racism impacts everyone, and not just those who are being oppressed by the racist attitudes. Culture is defined as the arts and other manifestations of human intellectual achievement that has been regarded collectively. It's also the customs, civilization, and achievements of a particular time or people. The mode of behavior within a particular group. And it's also improvement by mental or physical training. Our culture is something that we practice without even thinking about. So if we are living in a culture that is racist, that racist behavior is something that can be practiced unknowingly and or deliberately. And you may ask, well, how is that possible? I would say that the deliberate process would be the creation of messages and systems to support those messages that are being delivered en masse to the general public. This is how systemic racism is created. And this process started many centuries ago in the 1600s with the creation of messages to enable slavery of highly skilled Africans to start and thrive. They created messages and they put it out there, and it was very successful. And this is what has caused people of African ancestry to have their human rights violated on a global basis. For this reason, the United Nations has declared a decade of people for African ancestry in 2015 with the theme of recognition, justice, and development. They understood that of all the peoples on this planet, people of African descent were the most likely to have their human rights violated. And what part do we play in this process? We participate in this system when we receive and we believe the messages, the negative comments, or the stereotypes that have been said about who we are, what we can do, how we're supposed to walk, think, and act. If we receive those messages without questioning them, then we are unknowingly practicing racism against ourselves and against others. It's not what they say about us, it's what do I say about myself when I look within. Who do I say I am? The last definition that I was going to say I put up on the board, but it's not there, that was I stated was the improvement by mental training. And I would suggest that if you can improve by mental training, then you can also destroy or weaken by mental training. And what is mental training? Mental training is the continuous receipt of negative thoughts about who you are and what you can do and be. And unfortunately, both sides may not realize the extent of this impact that these beliefs have upon our behaviors. If we have wrong thoughts toward ourselves and towards others, we will behave in wrong ways towards them. Oh, 1 minute left, can you imagine? And this in turn will lead to poor results. And we see these messages all around us in the media, television, the news, and they're telling us who we are and who we are not. And a study has shown, for an example, it's the silent messages as well. African descent children, when they start school, are identified as the most alert and the most disciplined. But by the time they're in grade 2 or grade 3, they are the problem child. Why is that? It's because of the silent messages. A noise happens over there and Johnny's sitting over there. But instead of the teacher looking over there, the teacher looks, where's Johnny? Johnny puts 2 and 2 together. Oh, I'm supposed to act up. So Johnny does, self-fulfilling prophecy, because of a mindset. And we do it internally as well. It was identified that my first degree is in developmental biology. I'm a scientist at heart. But when I was on campus and when people found out that I was doing science, they said, well, blacks don't study science. We don't do math. I said, well, I do. I'm good at it. I like it. That's what I do. But again, where did that message come from? It was a wrong message, but it was received and it was welcomed. So we have to recognize that sometimes these messages make us immune to what's going on around us. Just one more example. I was working with a group of women, and we were getting together to talk about empowerment and challenges that they were facing. And so there were a number of immigrant women, a number of African Nova Scotian women, young, old, all different ages. And everybody was going around and they were talking about the challenges that they were having in business. I'm talking really fast, I know. But part of it was that and most of them brought up the fact that they were being discriminated against and racism. When it came to the young one, she was around 21, 22, and she was born and raised in Nova Scotia, and she said, I've never been discriminated against. I've never experienced racism. And so they asked her, these other women asked her, well, has this ever happened to you? Well, yes. Well, that's racism. No. Did this happen to you? Well, no. Has that happened? Yes. Well, that's racism. No. And it was really sad because I recognized, because it's so normal for her to be treated that way, she didn't see it for what it was. That's wrong. And that's what systemic racism does. And that's what living in a culture of racism does to people. And that's why we all have to fight, and that is resist the messages. We choose. We choose what we listen to, what we watch, and what we read. And we have to choose not to accept the negative messages. Because if we do that, we can change our culture, one person at a time. Thank you.
My time didn't start yet, did it? All right. The system does not include me. The system excludes me. Your name is difficult to pronounce, so you're screened out of employment. I lie my address on my resume because I know I won't get a job. I don't know how many times I've been stopped by police. Cabs don't even show up here. Systemic racism. Society's loudest secret that we all talk about. History repeats itself because the present has not listened. To thrive in a system that has historically was not built for you, by you, or with you is difficult and often daunting task for people from marginalized communities. To understand systemic racism, one must seek to understand a system's function and its purpose. I often ask myself the question, is it the system that is racist, or is it the people that embody discriminatory ideology and practices? There are a lot of great people that work in a system that is malfunctioning, but there's also a lot of people with racist ideologies within those systems. Here's a quick story. It's true. So I was a part of a think tank conversation in North End, Halifax a few years back. There were representatives from Toronto, from a bank that we all know and love. They stated their hiring practices at one point were to screen out names that were difficult to pronounce. If resumes came with addresses from particular communities in the GTA, they stated they would screen them out. And now, of course, the woman who mentioned the story was retracting her statement, as it was said in error. But this was a true story and was said in front of many folks. And so this, of course, is an overt practice that is easy to point out and, if known, can be rectified. Systemic racism is built and ingrained into large systems. And the question that many ask is how? We've not to forget that during our history and the inception of these systems, that people of color were not considered human. And so do you think that anyone who was not considered human had their thoughts, feelings, hopes, dreams, and wishes worked into any system upon its inception? Here's an excerpt from the Canadian government's website. Canada's legal system is based on English and French systems. Explorers and colonists brought these systems to Canada in the 17th and 18th century. Direct quote from the website. So, proving that we were not a part of the inception of the justice system. A few local examples. We know that African Nova Scotians make up nearly 5% of the total population, but we also know that we make up 14% of the incarcerated population. We know that Black and Indigenous students are suspended at a higher rate. We also know that Black people are 3 times more likely to be street checked by police in Halifax. Society either pretends it does not know of this situation, or people feel, in fact, incapable of doing anything meaningful about it. I often repeat this sentiment that as society, we have become complacent to these issues. I bet that everyone in this room, I bet that lawmakers in Halifax, I bet that all elected officials had a complaint, whether silently or publicly, about snow removal this winter. And I bet you just wanted something done about it. And have we taken a collective public stance on systemic issues the same way we did with snow removal? The success of organizations and businesses relies on diversity of talent and background and not a singular conception of ability. People tend to feel more comfortable with people who talk and act most like themselves. And because of this, institutions and systems tend to reproduce themselves in ways that perpetuate the status quo. This is one example for lack of diversity in the workplace. I also wanted to point out that I believe there's a difference between equal and equitable, and sometimes we mix up the two. When we refer equal, we're inferring that we're all the same, and we are not all the same. Equitable opportunities means that everybody starts from the same starting block. We're providing fair opportunities for everyone to start. And so, as mentioned, I outlined some issues and concerns, but I'm very much a person to fail forward and complain towards a solution. So I provided just some simple kind of tangible solutions that may help in the fight against systemic racism. Provide your staff with historical knowledge of racism and discrimination and how to recognize ways in which people are oppressed. Oppression is often a symptom of uncomfortable people. If you're conscious about the topic, conscious about oppression, conscious of racism and discrimination, you're more likely to not be an oppressor. Self-reflect. Admit you or your organization or institution has an issue and address it. Guilt and non-reflection foster a larger issue. Policy check. Are my policies and practices discriminatory to any one person or any group of people? This might make some folks uncomfortable, but white people need to be involved. Often a person of color is asked to fix racism that has been done to them. History shows that people of color did not create racism. It was something that was done to us and something that we need to endure. Often we're asked to fix the issue. And we need folks who currently have power and privilege in society to be a part of the issue that we need to change. The top person in charge of your organization needs to get on board. You breathe the workplace culture and set the tone for what is acceptable behavior. And then repeat that process. So, as people, we no longer want sympathy. We no longer want apologies. We no longer want hope. We don't want well-written emails and speeches that were crafted by communication departments. We ask for action because we've talked enough. And the thing is that we need to get it right, and we need to get it right now. And certain situations, in a lot, these things are life or death for people. And the noticeable complacency collectively as a society, and that's not negating that the work that individuals, organizations, and groups are doing, but collectively, that same energy that we bring when our driveway or our streets aren't plowed, we need to bring that same energy to issues that are affecting people of marginalized communities and affecting people in the streets of Halifax.
I want to give my 5 minutes back. Thank you for having me, and I really want to honor today my words to the Muslim community in Halifax who are grieving, and grieving in a way that I think that I know as Black people, when a young Black boy or girl is murdered somewhere far away, we grieve. And so I want to acknowledge that particular pain because that is connected to what we're talking about. You know, Jericho said something, and I prepared something, but the Spirit is moving me elsewhere, so I'm going to trust in the Lord here. But Jericho said something that struck me, that the system is malfunctioning, and I don't think it is. The system is functioning exactly as it was created to. And for many of us, we've been dying in that system because of that system. And it is that same system that needs to change. In fact, I would be very much happy if it was malfunctioning. When we have systems that were created on and created out of a necessity to turn human beings, brown and Black ones, into capital, then we have systems like the ones we do, whether they're the educational system, the legal system, social system, housing, et cetera, et cetera. And so when we're talking about allyship, and I really love the connection to systemic racism, because in the age of diversity and inclusion, we as Black people continue to be erased. And we need to really point out and really bring forth an anti-racist framework and discussion, because we continue to be left behind regardless of whatever organizations are prioritizing. And in the age of diversity and inclusion, we are not the priority. It certainly has not been my experience so far. I come from Ghana. I come from a long line of incredible warriors, many of them women. I come from a place where resistance started at the well. And that's where we need to be. We need to get back there and strategize. We need to disrupt this system. We must dismantle it. So when we're talking about allyship, I really want to talk to white people, because you gotta get busy. You understand? Because you haven't been busy enough. And I know that sometimes we can get into the conversation about, look at all that we've done. I'm certain that we've done some things, quite a lot, I am. But we're still not doing enough. And we need to get to the point where people are not dying because of the salient nature of systemic racism. Right? And so when we're thinking about what allyship is, I really want to get you uncomfortable. I want you to be uncomfortable about the systems that we have, because it doesn't benefit you either. If it doesn't benefit us all, it doesn't benefit anybody. And so we need to get to that place. And when we speak about whiteness, we need to recognize that you, in order for you to become the anti-racist ally that we're looking for, or that we need, that you need to first recognize your own racial identity. Because there is great privilege in your whiteness becoming an aspect of who you are that you can separate from racial identity. And that isn't the case. You are part of this piece. You're part of this conversation. And so we need to get you, or you need to, rather, to get yourself into a place where you're exploring your power and privilege. I simply always say to students, particularly white students that I work with, that white people, you need a family meeting, and quickly. We need to notice how racism is continuing to be minimized, denied, and justified. I work in various organizations, and I have worked in various organizations since moving to Toronto 5 years ago to Nova Scotia, and it was the first place that I realized I was Black. And I realized it because my name was a barrier, my face was a barrier, every part of me was a barrier. I was never the right fit. And when I was eventually hired into so-called diversity roles or equitable hires or what have you, when I reached my hand into these organizations, there was no one else reaching back that looked like me. When we are the only one in these systems, in these organizations of hundreds, when we walk into departments and everyone looks the same, all kinds of variations of the same face but different height of them, we need to recognize that there is a problem. And until we start to look at the various policies, legislations, practices, organizational cultures, and energies of every place that we are in as problematic and as perpetuating racism and oppression against racialized bodies, in particular Black bodies, we will continue to be in a system that is unequal. And we will continue to see ourselves as allies because we said, somebody let Shakira speak. That is a first step. But what are you doing about your hiring practices that remains the same and remains and continues to perpetuate oppression and lack of opportunities for various people? So we have to tackle the systems. We have to identify them. And it's really important that we don't confuse the battle with the war, because we've been fighting. You're just now joining. And it's important to recognize and honor the fight that has been happening and the war that has been happening on the bodies of our ancestors, on the blood that was shed by many of us, and on the young people who are out there fighting. And we truly need to recognize that it is important that we anchor them, that we foster an environment that continues to promote their voice and amplify their call and their cry for help, for justice. It's also really important that we think about how we're supporting leadership of people of color. Because I work in a place where there are so few leaders of color, but I know when there is one because of the ways in which we speak about them, the ways in which we either criticize them rather or ever so differently. And it isn't to say that be uncritical. We must be critical, but we really must also think about where and how we are critiquing various people of color and ways in which our unconscious bias and sometimes our explicit racism is at play in the ways in which we look at and speak about leaders of color. And it's really important that we recognize that we not have to do it alone. You do not have to do it alone. There are many people who have contributed and developed great bodies of work, of research, of knowledge about the fight that we're in. And so recognize that there is already things happening. Where can you join and how can you join? And as allies, sometimes, all the time, you need to step back. And one of the things that I really felt in my spirit to say is that what I'm really tired of is people seeing themselves as allies. Because you see yourself and you do the work of disrupting systems of oppression for a particular group doesn't mean you're doing it for all groups. And so those are some of the most dangerous ones. We need to call for co-conspirators, people who are going to stay there and remain there when there are reprisals because of action and voice. That's what we need, co-conspirators in the trenches with us. Thank you.
Good evening, everyone. My name is Donny Fairfax, and I'm really pleased to be here this evening to participate in this panel discussion. So I work with the YMCA Nova Scotia Works Employment Center in Dartmouth on the number 7 highway across from the Black Cultural Center. And the clients who visit our center are by and large from the Black communities of Cherrybrook, East Preston, and North Preston. However, we serve the wider community, and we have quite different sets of people who come to our center for service. We're a full-service employment center offering resume writing, guidance with respect to employment opportunities, skills development applications, return to work action plans, quite an involved employment center. I left employment services for about 5 years to work in private sector, to help out a friend to grow his company, actually in the nursing and home care sector, and thought I would do that just for a change because I'd been in employment services for over 20 years and just wanted to experience life in another world. In private sector, I never worked in private sector. I always worked in public sector organizations and not-for-profits. So it was quite an experience for me to go there after, the work that I've done in employment, which has by and large been advocacy for persons of African heritage in employment. And boy, what an eye-opener in private sector. Let me tell you, there is absolutely no mercy whatsoever in private sector when it comes to acknowledging the underrepresentation of peoples of African heritage and employment. There's absolutely none, no consideration. It's profit-driven, and I know I'm speaking here, and categorizing a large body of employers, but in that line of work, I was able to get around to get a sense of you know, how it is there. I remember having a discussion with my nurse manager about why people shouldn't be allowed to call into the service and ask for whatever color person they would like to have. Can you imagine speaking to me like that? Well, she didn't know who she was talking to, but I told her, as the manager of the organization, we don't do that anymore. You know, we just don't. So yes, so I'm back in employment services now, out on Main Street, and you know, things have not changed. I'd like to share some of the optimism with respect to things are moving in the right direction, but things have not changed a whole lot. You know, I was with a municipal government employer a few weeks ago, and I was telling the story, actually, the case as I arrived, I'll share it with you. But I was invited along with my colleague to deliver to this body during African Heritage Month some strategies around equity and inclusion. You know, so I was looking forward to it. You know, of course, I would look forward to such an opportunity. And I come up on the floor off the elevator, and I'm walking towards a reception desk. And the reception desk is one of those where you got to bend down, and there's a little hole you speak through and all that kind of stuff. And before I got there, this guy stood up and said, "Zap." I said, "What? Zap?" and it just struck me odd. What do you mean, what's up? You know, what a way to receive me, you know. And the person who invited me to this event caught what was happening from a distance, right? And if you want to see someone fly, you know, over the desk, it's like, oh my goodness, Mr. Fairfax, welcome, come on in, trying to avoid the, you know, it was very uncomfortable, but it was my first impression of that particular office, you know. I was thinking, wow, Zup, you know, like such a stereotype. And I was not impressed, nor was I impressed after I got in the room, because to be quite honest with you, there was 21, I don't know if you would refer to them as middle managers in this group, but it was just a homogeneous group. They were all white and pretty much women. I'd say 85% women. And, you know, and what was discouraging to me, in fact, I was, during the presentation, really quite guarded with what I had to say, because I was really shocked by how I was received, first of all, coming through the door, but secondly, this organization we've worked with over the years now, geez, we're going back a few years. I mean, I've worked with them well, might as well get it out, it's HRM. Work with them during fire and emergency services. I mean, you know, and we're going back, 11 years there, and you know, I was just shocked of all the work that we did or tried to do, and I was asking for certain names, right? Oh, they're gone. You know, they've, you know, rightfully, you know, they've retired, and but I was thinking, my goodness, we have a lot of work to do. You know, it's not like I'm there preaching to the converted. I mean, we really have a lot of work to do for those of us who are advocates, you know, on behalf of you know, people who have limited access to employment. So in the Prestons, you know, our community is really underemployed. Underemployment is just rampant, you know. And, you know, I watch our white clients come through the door, and they kind of find their way. It's interesting. We can provide minimal assistance to them, and they're on their way, you know. Ray Ivany used to tell me that, you know, Donny, you have to get across to people how it is that you ride that white wave of privilege. And I said, well, tell me, Ray, what does that mean? And he explained it, and I was so proud of him because he knew exactly what it was. He was prepared to say it. A true ally, if any of you know Ray Ivany, a true ally, he'll speak it. But that's the way it is. Like it's and I see that now as I'm older and a manager. I'm just kind of watching. Okay, so. These people come to the employment center, we can offer them minimal assistance, and they're on their way. When someone from the black community comes in, oh my goodness, we need wage subsidies, we need all these mechanisms to get it working, to get them employed. Yeah, 1 minute left, thank you. Glad I looked at that. I have 1 minute left. But it's nice to be able to bring these things to people, but to our people, it doesn't necessarily translate to employment. So even with the wage subsidies, with the various programs, that doesn't necessarily mean it translates to work. So we have a lot of work to do. I may have a chance later to speak of the allies, right? But I'll stop now. Just nice chatting to you guys, that's all. Thank you.
Thank you very much. So, I'm going to start my questions maybe by asking Sunday and Jericho if you would respond to this one. Sunday, you talked about us having a culture of racism. You spoke to a normalization of racism, Jericho, as well as Sunday. And Sunday, you said that our culture is racist. So my question is all hope lost? How can we begin to dismantle systemic discriminatory practices? How can we fight against racism, acknowledging that we live in a culture that's racist? Because fighting systemic discrimination, or systemic racism specifically, can seem like trying to pin down Jell-O. It's hard, it's nobody's problem.
Analogy.
Jericho, you said, is it the system or is it the people within the system at work? Whose problem is it? So how can each of us take responsibility to learn new ways of seeing policies and practices from a different perspective, and how not seeing as one-size-fits-all approach, because we know that doesn't work, so that we can dismantle these systemic and racist practices?
That was like 3 questions.
Sorry.
So I'll start with a few things. First, I think that there needs to be a distinct acknowledgement that it happens. There's several systems, several organizations who won't admit that there is systemic racism within their organization. So we start there. Then as I mentioned, we need white people to be a part of the solution, and so needs to be a lifelong commitment, because I can't go home and change the color of my skin, but you can go home and choose not to be an ally. And so we need you to be a part of it. You need to be a part of it for life. And so some kind of tangible things, I guess, would be who is your circle of influence within your organization, and who can you influence? Again, it needs to be a top-down approach. So, if we're talking a justice system, top judge, if we're talking chief of police. And so I think that using your privilege for positive power, and then if we want to talk about dismantling the system, acknowledging that we have a problem, and then looking at what our policies and practices are within our system, and asking questions, and having folks who have lived experience with this at the table. And there's a difference between being at the table and having a meaningful seat and power and authority at the table to challenge some of the ways in which that folks are oppressed. But I believe that a lot of it starts with actually acknowledging that there is a problem, because the first thing is that folks will get defensive. So acknowledging within your organization that there very well may be a problem, and then starting with what are we going to do about it? Because one, we may not acknowledge that we have a problem, and two, if we do, I want to see the action parts. And so there's been several things that have come out in the news in regards to street checks, maybe in regards to stuff that was in the news with HRM and different things. And so the action piece, I think, is what people want to see, and is what young people who are up and coming as well want to see.
I would agree with Rico. We do have a problem. I don't know that it takes a lot of observation to recognize that we have a problem here. We may not be willing to acknowledge it because the problem is benefiting a lot of people. And so change, when you think you may lose something, is very hard to enact. And yet I would say that by not changing, you don't even know what you're missing. That you're missing a lot more than what you think you might lose. When you have people who cannot achieve their potential because of their skin color or their name, and maybe you're going to the hospital and someone needs a major surgery or needs an invention, and it hasn't been created because the person who had the ability to make that happen because of his last name or his skin color, you didn't let him get his education. So I think it's something that we have to work at, and I honestly believe we have to rewire our brains. We have been brainwashed in a very destructive manner, and it's destructive on both sides. And we need to do whatever we can. We are in a battle. We are in a war. And the war is, can you become the best you? And society has not established it for you to be the best you. And you have to make the decision whether you're going to fight that battle or not. And the only way you can do it is recognizing, as Enrico said, there's a problem. We have a problem. What does it say? Houston, we have a problem. We have a problem. And then to acknowledge, I have the keys to fix the problem. We're not victims. And the keys is, what are we going to do to get different messages? We have to do it in our homes. If we can change one person at a time, one family at a time, then we can change the structures that we're living in. And that can only happen by getting different information. We have to feed ourselves different information. We have to demand that the media start putting out different information, that the media stop with the stereotypes and with the negative messages. We don't want to see people in the movies, and if they're black, we know they're going to get killed because they're the evil one. We don't want to see all this, the violence that's on television. We want different messages. And we have to choose. If they're not going to give us those messages, then we have to create them for ourselves. If they're not going to give us what we want, then we're going to shut it off. Now, people might say, I can't cut cable. Well, it's a life or death situation. You have to choose. You don't want the messages, and this is for everybody. If you don't want to have bad thoughts or wrong thinking towards people who don't look like you, then don't receive the negative messages. You have to stop and you have to reflect and see, what is the validity here? I mean, I know I've had it happen. I've walked down Spring Garden Road and someone's seen me coming and they've grabbed their purse and they've kind of held on to it tighter. Why? I don't want your purse. I don't want what's in your purse. So why do people think and feel that way? It's because they've been given certain thoughts. And our thoughts dictate our behavior. And our behavior gives us results. That's just the way it works. If you want different results, develop different thoughts.
Sorry. Okay, so I know it's not my question.
Is it on? Is your mic on?
There you
go.
I know it's not my question, so my apologies. But I just want to pick on two things that I heard from this. And I think the first one is around this idea of people are nice, right? When I came to Canada in '99, people told me the Canadians are nice. When I came to Nova Scotia 5 years ago, Nova Scotians are nice. And then I learned about Nova Scotian history. And I really wondered, where were the nice people? So niceness doesn't cut it. My challenging of my internalized racism is certainly a part of it, but it's not the only thing. And so it's really important that we recognize that being nice to Black people is not enough. And I sometimes I think about what would it look like if I walked into an HR department and everybody there was black? Would the organization really look at their hiring practices and think, we need to review something here? I think they would. But yet we have departments all over, all of us where we work, and everybody looks the same. Many of them are likely related. And yet we don't have an issue? So when we're talking about power and privilege, I really want you not to mix that it is simply black people's responsibility. You have access and power and privilege in a way that we do not. And that is just the reality. And so systems are continuing to intersect and interlock to continue to perpetuate this oppression and this exclusion of black people in various parts of them. And so I really want you to think about if we could really move to change something this quickly, if it was impacting whiteness and white people, I'm pretty sure that we know what we need to do. And I'm pretty sure that the why we're not doing it as quickly is the issue here that you need to reflect on and really identify with and start to challenge, starting within yourself, but certainly outward as well.
I'll be under a minute. So I just wanted to give a couple things that may be tangible. And so I've already mentioned that the top people in either organizations, whether it's in elected parties, need to denounce. Then we need to, because if we're thinking about the system, I'm looking at all systems and then the individual systems within. And so we need to look at our hiring practices. We need to look at the education curriculum. This has been a discussion that's been going on for some time. And if we look at the curriculum and we change the curriculum to accurately reflect history and accurately reflect folks of African descent, that's going to create a different identity shift for black people going through the education system, because there's history and then there's African-Canadian history, except African-Canadian history is history. See what I mean? And so then we need to look at our policies, and we need to look at the media. And so media has a big role in terms of creating narratives, untrue narratives for black people. And so when we think of, you talked about our thoughts, feelings, behavior, and so there's, if you're familiar with counseling or therapy terms, CBT, cognitive behavioral therapy, your thoughts affect your feelings, which affect your behavior. So if you think something, you feel something, you behave in a certain way. And so media and ideologies perpetuate unfair and untrue narratives for people of color, which then you think that, you feel that, and you behave in a certain way.
Thank you very much. And you really want to lead me down to another question, because I want to know, how do you know if you don't know? How do Sunday talked about needing to resist the messages, but how do you ever arrive at that place of awareness so that you can identify the messages that you need to resist if you want to become an ally, if you don't have the tools that it takes to even identify what those messages are? I'll just ask one person to respond to that, if you may.
Do we not have the tools? I would say we have the tools. We have the tools. I mean, all you have to do is look around in society and know that we have a problem. So you have to ask yourself, what part do I play in this problem? Mm-hmm. And then you just have to keep asking yourself, keep going down, well, why did I think that? Why did I do that? Keep going down, keep drilling down, and be honest. You might not like what you see or what you hear about yourself. But if you're serious about making a change, that's what you need to do. That's how you come to truth. I mean, we all want justice. We all want to have a prosperous life, but you can't have it if you don't have justice, and you don't get justice without truth. And so you have to go through that process.
You know, I've been
I don't think your mic's on.
Pardon me?
Will we have Donnie's mic on, please?
Oh,
it's on?
Yeah.
Okay.
Working with an employment outreach team through HRM, and that's a really difficult thing to bring people to the understanding of recognizing their privilege, even as it comes to delivering programs to communities, employment programs to community. And I'm referring to communities like in Halifax Core, we have an employment assistance initiative that is really vibrant with people of African heritage, the LGBTQ community, the disabled community. And I'm really concerned, though, for smaller black communities, Hammonds Plains, Lucasville, Cobequid Road. Now, I speak of this in our meetings, and we can't even come to consensus in terms of recognizing the need to have a concerted effort to bring services to these communities to make sure they're being serviced, you know, and I get the impression that it's that you can't tell me, you know, what we need, you know. And so here I am, a person of African heritage, been doing this for a while, wanting to provide advocacy to my communities, but yet I'm told that, no, this is not what you need, this is what you need, you know, very, very frustrating, you know. So to that, that privilege to be able to deny, deflect, really does us a disservice in terms of us getting ahead in employment.
I think that's the problem, though. Of course, whoever comes to the table, they have to be at the table because they want to make a difference, because they're willing to listen. It's like I've said when I was at Africville, and I spoke about the apology, and I said, I'll be upfront, I didn't think it was a sincere apology, and the reason why I said that was because some of the things that I was going through should only have been a phone call. All I should have had to have done was pick up the phone and say, we need signs, we need a bus, we need a sidewalk. And all they had to do was say, it's not in our budget right now, but let's get together. We'll talk about when we can put it in the budget, and let's do a timeline. So if they're going to come to the table, see, when you say the term ally, you mean, in my mind, someone who's linked with you, someone who's heart to heart. I got your back. We're together in this, which means that there's sincerity. There's a desire to make a difference. If we don't have the desire and they're just going through the words and through the motions, then we may as well go home and continue the fight as we do it. Because we need people at the table who mean business and who are going to do what they have to do, roll up their sleeves and get dirty, get in the ditches and get dirty. And if you don't want to do that, this isn't a safe game. It's a fight.
Thank you, Sunday. So as we drill down further into that, because I believe that a number of the people that you spoke of would consider themselves allies as they sit at these tables. Yes. And they have these positions of power and lots of privilege. So we haven't yet heard definition of what an effective ally looks like. So I know, Donny, you spoke to wanting to speak more to that as well. So I'll offer you and Shakira on this end.
Sure. So I think an effective ally is one who recognizes the issues, is open to receiving information on the issues, understands bias, stereotype. Oh, I've named so many assumptions, fear, you know, and we're able to talk about those things. The concept, the understanding of privilege and what that truly means when you hold that privilege, you know, and to do it in a way that we have time to do it. You know, my presentation the week before last, in a couple hours, doesn't do anything justice. Back in the day, we have some allies here in the audience, Vicki Samuel Stewart and Linda Nickel, previously of the Human Rights Commission, who have assisted us over the years in bringing awareness to the hospitality industry and so many industries. I believe we need to get back to that and make it regular that we do that. We need that, because the situation I walked into the week before last, as I told you, I was appalled. that there had been a backward shift, as far as I could see, in terms of, someone say something? No, I'm saying right. Yeah. So anyway, yes, so in terms of, understanding those barriers, and young people, I find, don't have a sense of that unless it's brought to them, and and lots of young people are very open-minded. I think it's prime time to bring these issues back, not in a 2-hour session, in regular intervals. Vicki, you'll remember, we used to have regular sessions, and people came to that table, but, I'll tell you just a brief story about in the hospitality industry when one of the general managers called me because one of our students, one of his staff felt that one of our students was being rather sexual towards her. And it really bothered me, thinking, oh my goodness, I wonder what happened, because we worked so hard to bring these young people into employment in untraditional roles in the hospitality industry. Anyways, come to find out in meeting the employee that she didn't really have an issue with our client. It was her boyfriend, her partner, that had an issue with her working with a black man, on shift, But kudos to the manager who had your training, Vicki, who thought that, geez, there's something here. I'm going to call Donny, and because there was a time when he would have just let him go. You see, so what. So we need to get back to that awareness and bringing that information to people so they have something to hold on to. Because I'm convinced that people given the right tools, the right information, will make at times appropriate decisions.
Thank you. Yeah, I don't even know why I'm bothering to add, but I will because I'm Ghanaian. When we speak about allies, I think about young people. Right? Why this day was started, the people we're speaking about in South Africa, these were young people. In our own communities, it's young people, your own children, your own people in your families. It is young people who are often so disposable as to put themselves in between these systems of violence. And so when I think about effective allies, I think about the young people in Halifax that continue to shout, to create space, make space, and who continue to face the level of incredible violence in this community for speaking out against injustice, because they recognize that injustice anywhere is a threat to justice everywhere. So when we're talking about what effective allies is, I think effective allies are people who recognize that they don't need to make assumptions. They don't need to ask for proof. So when we say that this is happening, you don't need to say, oh, really? How? We got to stop that if we want to be effective allies. How do we know there's a problem? Because we said so. I think effective allies recognize that they have to take responsibility for their own learning, that they cannot continue to come to us because the representational burden, the mental gymnastics, intellectual gymnastics, emotional labor that is being black in Nova Scotia in 2019 is incredibly taxing. And they need to take responsibility for their own learning. In 2019, there is no shortage of places where you can learn about how to be an effective ally. And I think we need to start to teach our children. I am a parent to a racially ambiguous child in Nova Scotia, and my introduction to racism in ways that is so frightening is because of this person that is my son walking around these streets, and people say to me, aren't you so happy he's not so dark? People touching and people seeing as though, and feeling, because it is bravery in 2019 to say anything and not expect me to react in a way that threatens your space. Because how could I? Because I recognize, and you recognize, that the consequences would be disproportionate. And so when we're talking about it, I think we have to realize, and effective allies need to start to think about and unpack their own power and privilege. You really need to understand that, and you need to look within before you look outward. And you really need to start to pinpoint the ways in which your privilege intersects with my oppression, and how your existence and how you're continuing to uphold systems of oppression that continue to disadvantage me, and at worst, continue to place me in violent positions, quite literally. And you need to act and realize that you need to do it together. We are gathering, we need to do things ourselves, but you also need to really, when I talk about having a family meeting, I don't say that lightly. And I'm not talking about the KKK kind, because I know that is also quite something that's a part of the fabric of Nova Scotia. And so it's really important that you think about how do we gather and have a conversation without bringing in another Black person to validate the existence of these issues. You got some work to do. In 2019, there's endless resources for you, and an effective ally recognizes that and takes advantage of them without further taxing the 1 or 2 or 3 or 5 of us Black people around them.
Thank you. Jericho, I'm going to interrupt you, go on to the next question, and then open up the floor. I know we're moving towards the end of our time. So my final question before we open up the floor is, actually I'm associating it with a quote from Shakira. Don't confuse the battle with the war. And you said racialized people have been fighting. We have been fighting. We need co-conspirators in the trenches with us. So my question to you, and I'll ask maybe just two persons on the panel to respond. How can allies and people who wish to be allies, in light of that, avoid quote unquote, the white savior syndrome?
That's a good question. So I'll start. So I think that first part of that is if you're just an ally, you're conveniently there. But if you're an effective ally, you're committed and you're constant. And so there is some of that where there's a saving, and we don't need saving, but we need your help. We need you to stand with us and not do things for us. And so when we're talking about not having the white savior complex, we're talking about not coming in and taking over, not coming in and making it your thing, but making it our thing together. And giving us, well, you know, sometimes we take it, but giving us some authority in terms of what it is that we're doing, because sometimes individuals, or actually often individuals, will come into Black communities and study the communities and take the research and take the stuff and leave, and say that it's for good reason. And so I think that to avoid the white savior kind of issue is genuinely having a desire to want to be there, and knowing your history, knowing your research, and working alongside folks in the community to make change and hear what the issues are, and not telling people what you think the issues are.
I think the white savior complex is something that really needs to be really dismantled. And when, I mean, I'm trying to speak from a local, but as someone who's also Ghanaian, white savior complex means so much to me. And so I think it's really important that we recognize that Black people are not yours to save. Black people have been saving themselves and been doing more and thriving for forever. And I know that because it is my story. And so it's really important that we recognize that no one, Black community is not looking for you to come and take them away from something, right? You're not Jesus Christ or Muhammad or any of these other folks. I think it's really important that you recognize that your role as an ally is because the system includes you. You are interacting with the system as well. And your very being is impacted by the system. And as we continue to connect with the system and interact with it on a regular basis, we both recognize that, and if you see yourself as an ally, that you're interacting with it differently. And it's interacting with you differently than it is with me. And so it isn't that you need to save me from it, but it's to recognize that this system itself is the thing that needs to get to be done away with, that needs to be dismantled. Because we have a history of doing incredible things on our own. I'm speaking about a people that descending from folks like Santi Howard, Julius Nyerere, Kwame Nkrumah, and endless many other people. This is who we are as descendants of Africa. And so it's really starting I think, for you to challenge what it is that makes you think you need a save, that you need to be at the front, that you need to be the one with the megaphone, that you need to be the one organizing, that you need to, all of that. What is it at play here? And that is the power and privilege that you might not necessarily be cognizant of, but it is at play. And so I know we say that we need your help. You have a role to play. I have challenges with the word help. I think you need to come to a place that you recognize that this system is simply not serving you at your best either. And it's the system that we need to really engage and interact and start to really break away with. We need to deconstruct and dismantle that. And so that is where I think we need to come to.
Thank you very much. And now, we'll open the floor. I saw a hand back there before I saw your hand, so I thought I saw a hand back there. No? Okay, go ahead. There wasn't a hand. There was somebody putting their jacket on.
Okay, well, I'll just stand up and then I'll sit back down because I don't want to be just talking to everybody here. Okay, in front of everybody. Well, I want to say thanks very much to the panel. You were all very, very insightful, very well thought out presentations. And there were just a few things that just made me chuckle when you, Shakira, talked about this not being this being 2019. The reality is that it does feel like it's 1920, and that things haven't changed, as Donny had said, and that there's so many things that we have been dealing with from day one that are still here today, and there's still the struggle. And I did hear, I think it was Jericho or one of you presenters saying that we don't need allies. Well, I forget exactly what it was, but basically, my point about it is that allies do need to have that savior complex. We said we didn't need allies with the savior complex. They do, but they need to save their own. They don't have a role at all in saving us. But those people that Donny dealt with at the front desk who treat you with, or greet you with stereotypes, the top person being as dynamic and as insightful and as powerful. We've all worked for really good white people at some point. But the reality is that when that white person leaves, there's nothing in place. So it has to be systemic, and it has to be white people talking to white people. Because I don't know white people well enough in an institution. All they do is cause me a whole lot of grief. You know? We all run into the same problems over and over again in all of those levels within the system, from the reception desk up to the senior management, to the middle management, to our colleagues. And sometimes, you know, things start to work well, and we meet people who do understand, but they're only one person, and they'll change when that person changes, and the situation will change. So I guess the question here is, how do white people get to change white people? What is it that they need to do to work with their own? And I know that, you know, that's basically better answered by white people, and we should have a panel in 2019 up here of white people talking to people about how they should be their allies. You should be our allies. I don't know. I mean, you just haven't done it. So I just don't have those answers. But do you have suggestions for white people in terms of how they can help white people?
Yes, I do have a suggestion, and I want to say appreciate everything everyone has said on the panel. And it especially resonated with me, Shakira, when you said about needing co-conspirators. And I was in a position, what I can say about what white people need to do, based on my experience, is not only be aware of how the people of color in your organization, in your office, are being disadvantaged, but to also be aware of how the white people are being advantaged, because that is part of what's going on. I was in a situation, I'm a journalist, and I had taken a year of unpaid leave, and I was having such a wonderful time not being in that newsroom, and I was in a position, and I said, I'm going to take another year of unpaid leave. My white male editor said to me, you cannot do that. And I said, well, why can't I do it? He said, it will set a precedent for people wanting to ask for leaves. I said, a precedent of people asking for 2 years of unpaid leave? I just happened to be in a position where I could do that because I don't have a family, because I was living with a friend of mine. And I said, what are you telling me? And he said, come back to work or you will lose your job. All right? He straight up said that to me. So because I wasn't born in 1620, I understood that I was window dressing for that newspaper. I was the only black reporter there, that it served them to have me in that newsroom. And I said, well, I am not on anybody's plantation, and I am not going to come back to work with a gun, over on my head. So he said, okay, that's it. So I wrote my letter of resignation, and I got a phone call from the union saying, you are asking for the same thing that a white male reporter on this staff has been doing for the last 2 years. I will deal with it. The next thing I knew, I got a call from this man saying, we have reconsidered. All right? We have reconsidered, and please enjoy your other next year of unpaid leave. And so this white man who was, I knew who he was, but we didn't really have a close relationship, but he understood because he had made it his business, not only to see how the people of color were being mistreated and abused and discriminated against, but how the white people on staff were being privileged and having these advantages. So that's something that the white people, I could say, could do. Look at the ways in which your white staff members are taking this and having that privilege and going on this retreat and that other thing. And then when your people of color employees ask for it, then all of a sudden we can't do it. And oftentimes, if truth wants to be told, it's because it benefits them to have us sitting up there. And some of us know that.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you. And sorry, I just want to say something. I think what you're saying is, what you said is, for both of you, really sticking with me, because I think in these, as we have it, some white leadership treat their black employees as though they own them. Right? And so they did us a favor. They hire us. They pay us every 2 weeks. And so it is the undertones of that which, when we start to feel, what is going on here? Why is it I asked for something and you said no, but I seem to see all this full room of people getting what they're, the same thing I'm asking for. What is happening here? It is when I see myself in a position that is not yours, but above yours, and all of a sudden it's, but why not mine? As though that is the thing we need to aim for. And I think one of the places where I've seen a white co-conspirator really do incredible things was recognize their institutional privilege and start to really put themselves in various spaces with me to anchor my voice and to really play support. They didn't completely understand it. They recognized that they were putting a lot of things and a lot of pressure in terms of what I would be dealing with after those meetings, and made it also very clearly that should there be any reprisals, they will continue to be right next to me, bringing forth what I was pushing for. And I think that's what we need, right? There's going to be reprisals. And when we speak up and we challenge, or even when we bring up anything, it's, there goes that Negro again. And this happens often, all the time. And that's where you actually need to be. Not in the front in front of the cameras and things look fine and shiny, but when things are really ugly behind closed doors after we've been called in to get a talking to because we spoke at a 1 or 2 pitches too high, that's when you need to be there.
Thank you. Go ahead.
My sister, it seems like we're vibing on the same frequency. I was just at a conference, a student-run conference on Saturday. It was supposed to be about how to create a more inclusive space for racialized people. There were 2 presentations about the issues that were affecting Black people and Africans. And then someone had the audacity to talk about Black communities as a place, as a negative place that people need to figure out how to move away from. They were referring specifically to to where we are right now. And so there were a bunch of university professors there who had been teaching the students apparently about anti-Blackness, but they didn't say anything about it. So then I put up my hand and nobody responded, and then I got up and I said, I am Isoko from the west coast of Africa, and we have a sacred duty to be concerned with the things that affect our communities. So I have lived in this community, and I'm appalled that someone would say something to say that their office moving away from, basically, it wasn't any friendship center they were talking about. They were talking about how they're moving away from a bad neighborhood and they're going to move up the street and it will be safe for these international students to come to now. They were mainly talking to international students, mostly from India, that are in Cape Breton. And so I questioned that and just made it clear to them that that's anti-Blackness that they were practicing. I was evicted from that conference. So the question is, how do we deal not just with the so-called white allies, but also racialized people who the system is using as buffers? You know, because we have a bunch of people who don't want to talk about the issues that affect issues of race. And so the systems conveniently will either hire a white woman or they'll hire a racialized person who they think is not going to either act too Black or is not Black to meet their quota of so-called diversity, and then use them to silence us when we actually talk about anti-Blackness. So I guess that's my question in a nutshell.
Who's going to take that one?
I think one of the things that I think this has, it has a lot of faces to it, a lot of facets to it, because when people, when they have the token person that they've hired in that position, understand, I mean, I do understand that that person needs a job and needs to pay the bills. And we put a lot of pressure on them because we expect them to speak out, and yet they are probably afraid to do so because of the repercussions that will happen. And this is where allies need to be found so that they can do their job, but they can also put forward the needs of their people. And it's kind of hard because you know that sometimes when you put forward a need, you might be the only one. And when your head's up, you can easily get shot, and people don't care if you lose your job. And so I think we have to be cognizant of the fact that they need to survive, and how do we come alongside of them and help them. And for those who are the other extreme that really don't care about their people, we just need to take them out back and have a conversation with them.
I thought you were going to say something else, Sunday.
Oh,
non-Black
okay.
people.
Oh,
okay.
Sorry, I misunderstood.
I misunderstood you too. Okay. Anyone else?
My question might gravitate a little towards Mr. Fairfax, but I open it up to the entire panel. I seem to notice a little bit of a correlation between marginalized groups and being geographically separated from a lot of resources and opportunities in this province specifically. So in regards to environmental racism and environmental groups in this province, what are your thoughts on that, and what do you think are the best ways to kind of overcome that issue in these different Black communities around us?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, in the Prestons, we have the problem of transportation, for instance. That's been, you know, a problem of people getting to employment centers, even on the Dartmouth side, like in the I'm trying to think of the Highfield Park. what do they call the shopping complex, the new one there? Dartmouth Crossing, thank you, I'm always stuck for that. But even that's problematic, you know? And so, and that's been the nature of racism in terms of, you know, the settlements there in the Prestons, you know, and people were put out there for a reason, you know, far away from everything and everybody else, you know. So people have adapted to the point where they've arranged transportation, they carpool, those sorts of things in order to get to work, but it still remains problematic, you know, especially for those who are disenfranchised and don't have the financial resources to, you know, like some people come to our office for bus tickets, and we routinely keep bus tickets just for that reason, you know, to enable them to get to work if, you know, that's problematic, you know. Yeah, all of those considerations, you know, for the black community, and I only see the black community doing that. I don't see the white community coming too, you see, so it speaks to just what you're talking about and the fact that we have to provide in that way, yeah.
And I would like to add too that you did indicate that it's historical, and it is historical. We did not choose to live that far away from the center.
Yeah, that's right.
That's where we were permitted to live. And as historical in 2019, that's another problem that we have, that deliberate decision-making on our behalf has never been acknowledged and therefore rectified. That should not be a big fight today to get the funds so that people can access the centers for employment, for medical purposes, for education.
Yeah, and to that, even with the bus system that serves those communities, it's still not adequate, you know, so, yeah.
Thank you very much. Jericho, did you want to add to that?
Yeah.
And we're going to wrap up our questions because of the time, but
I saw you give me a look.
Yes,
just
thank you.
a couple things. I think, like, if we think about some of the black communities in HRM, North Preston, East Preston, Union Square, Mulgrave Park, even they're somewhat food deserts in terms of resources that are around those communities. And if we think about the community design of them, it's especially the public housing communities. I've read some research on Mulgrave Park, and that community was designed to be undesirable. It was designed for people to move in and move out, but the opposite has happened. And the communities are designed in a way that's not conducive to foot traffic coming in, and it's boxy, and they're not actually set up to kind of fit in with the rest of society. It's almost as if there's, you know, outside, once you're in the community, you're in the community, and you feel kind of boxed in. And so I think, however, I think that with those issues, the communities have historically become extremely resilient. There may be certain people in certain communities who you know you can go to get certain goods. Folks in the communities are helping out individuals with ability issues and getting to grocery stores. So we've figured it out, but it's still not equitable for those communities. But we've figured it out, and the communities have kind of gotten together and made it as accessible as possible for themselves.
Thank you very much. As I reflect again on another quote, and this one was from Shakira as well. There's one more question. Okay.
Actually, I want to make a comment as opposed to a question. So
is it connected to that? Because I have a comment.
To the discussion that we're having tonight.
On that topic? Because I don't want to get disconnected from this, what they just said. Could I make my comment first and then refer to you?
All right.
So the comment was that Shakira had mentioned that the system is not malfunctioning, it is doing what it was designed to do. And we're speaking about the historical placement of people of African descent in Nova Scotia and understanding that black people have been historically penalized, were penalized then, are still being penalized. So we need to call on our planners, our developers within municipalities across the province, it's not only in HRM, but across the province to address this systemic isolation that continues to impact upon all areas of life as it regards racialized people, black people specifically, because then, and I had the opportunity to work in one of those municipalities, because when you address or you seek to address the issues, then you're told there are not enough people in these communities to bring in bus services. Or that's zoned in the wrong zone. Well, you are the one who holds the policy to zone, so rezone. And the reason there are more and more people leaving Black communities is because of the services that are not available and accessible to them. So we continue to have this circular argument when it's in fact steeped in that malfunctioning, no, proper functioning of systemic racism. We see it every day at work. Thank you, Charlie. You go ahead.
You're welcome. I just wanted to very quickly make a couple of points when it comes to what can be done to be an ally. And I will say this because I don't work for government at this point in my life. And I know that those who do work for government may not be in a position to say it. But I think all of us who have concerns need to pick up the phone or go to the computer and send an email to our elected representatives or to the senior management people within the government, because the folks who work there can't do it. They can say, you know, if this happens, the community's going to be upset. And I know when I worked for the city, I said that many times. And then nobody called. Nobody emailed. So you're the one that's looking like you don't know what you're talking about because the community's not upset. We haven't heard from them. So we have, and it doesn't matter what color you are, if the issue is pertaining to racism, you need to let somebody know that you're upset with it. Number two is the issue of mentorship as an ally. Quite frankly, mentorship is nice, but sponsorship is better, okay? And sponsors will put their neck out on your behalf and say to whoever's doing the hiring that I know that Kesa can do a great job and you should hire her and give her a chance, versus working with Kesa to prepare for applying for a job and all of that kind of stuff, because we have great resumes. We have great experience. We're not getting hired because we don't make the hiring decisions. So we need people to influence the ones that are making the hiring decision. Sponsors, not mentors. The last comment I want to make is this is deja vu, because many of us in this room were in the library 40, 50 years ago having these same conversations. And the difference is, you know, some of us are getting tired, but there has to be action, okay? In order to stop racism, you need to take action. If you say it's wrong, that's wonderful, but if you don't do anything about it, we'll be 50 years from now having the same conversation. Thank you.
And, sorry, if I can kind of echo into what Charlie was saying, I think you speak such truth, because one of the things that I often think about in being in these organizations is, where is my community? When something happens and I am in that organization and you're calling me saying, oh my God, what are they going to respond to this scandal, or we just read this and what have you? Where are you in calling the administration and saying, what is going on here? And then following up and holding them accountable. But certainly check in, and you don't have to be Black. You can call in and check in and hold these organizations accountable in ways that is quite unsafe for the people who are in there. And so I think it's really important that if you see yourself as an ally and something has happened, you know about it because it's all over the media or people are talking about it, call in. Call in and say, this thing that has happened should not be happening. And keep checking in until they tell you something that you're satisfied with.
Thank you very much, Shakira. I understand that we have 2 other questions, and it is 8:30, so we understand if some of you need to leave, but we also want to recognize our elders in the room, and we thank you for being here.
Thank you.
Thank you.
My name's Iona Duncan States. I'm a resident or pre-resident of Beachville. But I just feel we're not cohesive enough as a total Black communities. Our community is shrinking very fast. And what's happening is, I noticed that in our African heritage map, Beachville wasn't even there, it was Lakeside. And another thing, I got something on my phone. I went to Beachville, and Beachville came up on my phone, and they had made a comment about me going in dangerous area. So there's things happening with the media out there, as well as other things. The other thing I want to make a point of was if we're going to work to make things better for ourselves, we have to be more cohesive. We have to, when someone has a problem in your community, we all go to your community. Someone has a problem in another community, we all come together to deal with the matter, because a larger number helps. And most people who are out there fighting for themselves, other than us, they're a grouping. They're going to stand up, arm to arm, linked together as a community. That's all I have to say.
Thank you. Thank
you. Thank you. Just, I'll be very brief. I think, to be straight to the point, white folks have to take ownership of their privilege. And if you are an anti-racist and so on, show it. Step up to the plate and show it. And my cousin here says, allies or lies. If you're a true ally, you know what to do. It's your problem. It affects us adversely, but you created it. If an architect created this building, they know where it's at and how this joins that and so on. So you all better get it together, stand together, and support African Nova Scotians, because the pain and suffering we endure is caused by y'all. Good night.
Thank you very much, Mr. Shepherd. And that's our final comment for the night. But I want to thank you very much, panelists. It's been my honor to serve as your moderator, and there's so much knowledge and wisdom in this room at the panel table, as well as sitting in the seats. So we thank you all for your questions, and for those that you wanted to ask, that you haven't had an opportunity to ask, or maybe you didn't have the courage to ask in this forum. We're going to stick around, and please feel free to find us.
So I just want to say again how, on behalf of African Nova Scotian Affairs and the Human Rights Commission, just to take a moment to thank the panelists again, and really thank you for attending and asking the questions and sitting in maybe, hopefully, an uncomfortable spot, really, because when you're a little bit uncomfortable, as Kesa was saying earlier, that's when you kind of have the knowledge. That's when you kind of ask the questions. And if you look around the room, there's allies here. There's people here. If you're not comfortable in talking to one of the panelists or anybody, just ask somebody, but don't let the conversation not leave this room. The conversations need to continue on. So however that forum happens, where was it, one or two are gathered, then you can actually have the conversation. By all means, please continue to have those conversations, because it's really important to how we have the future of our province of Nova Scotia. So thank you. I also want to thank the Delmore Buddy Day Learning Institute for this incredible space. Every time I come in here, I love it. Yes, so thank you. And I also want to thank Mahogany O'Keefe, Suzanne Cloty, Shavaz Bain, and Amelia Jarvis for helping Kesa and I, and Jeff, where's Jeff over Mars? Jeff was here, he's probably gone. But just a thanks, because you know, when you start doing these things, and although Kesa and I do a lot of things in partnership together, it takes a team to really pull something like this off. And although Kesa and I are here in the front, by all means, we are not doing this in isolation, because it really does take a full complement of team to actually pull something like this off. So thank you to everybody there, and thank you again.